This is real footage I got from a custom track worldwide back on February 10th, 2023. It has something that's an incredibly rare sight. Top 6 9999 VR in Mario Kart Wii. Getting something like this just doesn't really happen. And none of this was staged at all. A bunch of us were racing online and this just happened to occur. So what circumstances made this possible in the first place? Before I begin, it's important to understand how Wii's VR ranking system works, at least at a basic level. It uses what's called an ELO system, meaning that the game will give or take away VR points based on what everyone else had in the room. In addition, the number of points that get distributed to everyone in a race will equal 0. Basically, this column right here. If you add up all the numbers, it equals 0. Though there are some exceptions, such as the max VR cap swallowing VR. Here, for example, I got +0 for first place, even though the previous race before this one, I got 102 points. Meaning the race after this, where I got +0, I should have gained around 100 points or so. But in most cases, the numbers you see in this column will sum up to equal 0. In addition, the amount you gain or loses depends on whom you beat or lose to. If you beat someone who had a lot lower VR than you won't gain much from them. For example, I only gained 40 VR here because I was well above the rest of the room. Meanwhile, second place gained more than me because they were over 2,000 points lower. But if someone who has lower VR beats you, they can gain quite a bit, such as me here gaining 375 for third place, just because I was thousands lower than everyone else. To show how the game calculates the amount of VR you gain or lose in a race, let's look at this results screen I got from a CDGP Classic Worldwide a few months back. As you can see, for 5th place, I was able to gain 18 VR. I'm gonna quickly explain how I gained those points using Wii's VR formula. Since it would take a while to explain, I won't go into the exact calculations as to how I gained 18 VR, just how much I gained and lost per person in this race. In a future video though, I'll explain exactly how Wii's ranking system works. To sum up the formula quickly, each person who beats you will take away a certain number of points, and for each person you beat, you take a certain number of points from them. How much VR you gain from these people is then subtracted from the total amount you lost, giving you your final result. For reference, here's where everyone else was at, including me before the start of the race. I began at 9,756 VR. When we look at the results screen following that race, the winner was Julius. He began with 9,609 VR. Because he beat me that race, this means he took 14 VR away from me, as well as an additional 121 from everyone else in the room, giving him a grand total of 135 points that race. In return, I lost 14 VR from him. Meanwhile, the runner-up Domo was at 9,745 VR. Because I also lost to him, he took 13 VR from me. And from RC and Anubis, I lost an additional 14 and 20 VR from them. This meant I lost a total of 61 VR from these other players for getting 5th place. However, because I beat Virox, who originally had 9,830 VR, I was able to gain 14 points from him. And from Bradley, I gained 8 additional points. When you add the total amount of VR I gained from beating these 7 people below me, it comes out to be 79. If you take 79 and subtract 61 from it, you get 18 VR. And each race is calculated like this. The amount of VR you gain or lose is based on what everyone else had. Earlier, I mentioned that the max VR cap swallows VR. That's because it's the limit you can get to. If you are in a situation where the amount of VR you gained would put you above 9999, it would drop you to that number instead. As a result, you can find yourself gaining less than what you should have, as I explained earlier. For example here, I was able to gain +0 for 5th place. That's because most of the room was above 9,000, meaning that everyone was high enough to where even 5th place was secure enough for me to not lose anything. And in very, very rare cases, you can get +0 for 6th place even at max VR, such as in this worldwide from Imperious Smith's YouTube channel. Side note, I had to spend so long trying to find this happening outside of hacker rooms, where people were feeding others with like 35,000 VR. Like, I cannot begin to explain how rare this apparently is. Do not spend your free time looking at VR screens. It's not fun. Do not recommend. So yeah, as you can see, despite a bit of loss to my sanity to find this, it's possible for VR loss to be prevented at 6th place even with the maximum number of points. However, the reason why this took absolutely forever to find was because unless everyone was at or close to 9s, it just wasn't possible. At all. From what I saw, even the best rooms out there would require you to get top 5 to keep your max VR, such as Ryun here losing 2 VR for 6, despite how extremely high ranked everyone else was in the room. Because getting to 9999 requires people to do pretty well in a room, as well as requires said a room to have a high enough average, it's not the most common thing to see multiple people hit it in a race. Thus, seeing 6 people reach it all at the same time just doesn't really happen. In fact here, I lost 21 points for 6th place because a lot of people in this room were in the lower 9,000 range or at 8,000. Because so many people were quite a bit lower than me, the 5 people who beat me took away more VR than I gained from the 6 people whom I beat. And that's the reality with Wii system. If you want to maintain max VR, you gotta place pretty high. Even mediocre doesn't cut it a lot of the time. However, if you look at that race at the beginning of the video, everyone below us was not even at 9,000. So how could this happen then? Well, what happens if instead of the amount of VR you gained or lost being dependent on everyone else, what if instead it was just a flat rate? Introducing Mario Kart Wii Deluxe, a custom track pack that has done exactly that. As of Mario Kart Wii Deluxe version 7.0, the amount you gain or lose per person is just 10 points. If you beat someone, you gain 10 VR from them. If you lose 10 VR. Essentially, what everyone else has doesn't matter. It only matters where you place. As long as you place in the top half, you'll gain VR. If you place in the bottom half though, you'll end up losing points. Here for example, I gained 10 VR for 6th place, despite being at 9969 at the beginning of the race, which is only 30 points off from the maximum number you can have. In here, I was able to gain +0 for 9999 in 6th place in an 11 player room, not even a full one. That's because with this new ranking system, I lost 50 VR to the people who beat me, but gained 50 back from the people whom I beat, allowing for this +0 gain. The reason the creator of Mario Kart Wii Deluxe, known as FJ Royette, decided to use his new ranking system was because of how harsh Wii system could be, especially to higher ranked players. This is a Mario Kart game after all, thus it can be very unforgiving to any victim who decides to play it. So a good amount of bad luck in a race can cause you to lose hundreds of points. There's also things like people with new licenses draining VR, and guess who are always considered 5,000 for the sake of calculations, where them finishing in a good spot against higher ranked players can absolutely destroy people's VR below them.
Look at you!
Look at the Dre.
The 3 guests. You guys are amazing.
Wow, look at the VR. I mean, you know, plus
It's
not even
awful.
100 compared to hundreds lost from every player.
My god.
And recovering those points can be very difficult. Once your VR gets pretty high, it becomes a lot harder to maintain those points for most people. This is by far the most common complaint people have with Wii's ranking system. You can spend hours getting hundreds of points only to lose it all in a few races. Deluxe's system though strongly minimizes this effect, at least for higher ranked players. This is because it doesn't matter what everyone else has. If you lose to someone, it's only -10 points, as opposed to losing like 50 points from someone thousands lower than you. Thus, you can find yourself getting the absolute worst luck in the history of mankind, and, at worst, in a 12-player room, lose 110 VR points. Meanwhile, on Wii's normal ranking system, you can find yourself losing, and I'm not kidding at all when I'm saying this, 1,232 points. This can happen if you are a maxed ranked player losing to 11 other 1VR ranked players. Don't believe me? Well, here's footage of someone getting 1,172 points in one race. And everyone below just hemorrhaged VR. Yeah, very punishing indeed. So what's the result of this new VR system? Well, it's one that really favors players who have a decent grasp of the game. Because all that matters now is finishing in the top half, you can find yourself gaining points all the way to maximum VR without too much effort. For example, Murray here started this session with 8,635 VR, and 20 races later, he was able to get to 9999 because it's a lot easier to get tons of points even if you have a high amount of VR as it is. And then once you reach max VR, it can be very easy to maintain. Thus, someone like me who has played the absolute living daylights out of this game can find themselves having max VR streaks for dozens of races in a row. At this point, the challenge becomes how long I can maintain 9s for rather than just trying to get them. So how about if you're not the strongest at the game? Well, it's not good news for you. Because it only matters if you place in the top half or not, people who generally can't will continuously lose points. If you keep on placing in low spots over and over again, you'll finish the road to the ultimate demise in Mario Kart Wii. One singular VR point. The footage you're seeing here is the first time this actually happened on Deluxe, which occurred at 1:36 Universal Time on February 18th, 2023. For my fellow Americans out there, this translates to 7:36 PM Central Time on February 17th. This phenomenon was achieved by our friend Carlos here. Since 7.0's release, we've seen a few people reach it as well. Velocista has gotten there, and I think someone called Eduardo has as well. I will say, it's kinda cool seeing people floating around with one VR. Because of all those 35,000 hackers before the Wi-Fi shutdown, Wii system became very top heavy where instead of people being mixed around 1 and 9999 VR, with the average being around 5,000, most of everyone went into the top half of that range. In fact, if you look at the Mario Kart Wii stat page for Wiifi at any point in time, nearly everyone will be above 5,000 VR. So seeing someone with like 3,000 or even 2,000 is quite rare, even rarer than max VR. In fact, it's so rare normally that unless you hack it, you are not achieving 1 VR. If you were to join a normal Mario Kart Wii Worldwide with 1 VR and any of the Wiifi moderators saw you with that, they would instantly ban you, assuming you're trolling and trying to drain everyone else. In addition, losing every race on purpose until you reach 1 VR is not allowed either. As for why this is allowed on Mario Kart Wii Deluxe, it's because for custom track packs, the rules for VR just come down to the owner themselves. Since FJ Royette allows it, it's okay here. Again, because this never happens normally, seeing it happen at all, it's just special. I really like it. Shoutouts to all the 1VR players out there. Y'all are pretty cool. So now I'm finally at the point where I can explain how we got Top 6 9999 to happen. And based on what I said earlier with Max VR being achievable for a lot of people, you should be able to tell where I'm going. Because of how favorable Deluxe's system is for skilled players, it ends up being very common to see multiple Max VR players in a race at a time. Before that Top 6 happened, I had many races where 3 people finished with 9s, 4 people even. By the way, this footage you see here was actually from my first ever race on 7.0. And in some rare cases, even 5 people finishing with 9999. Yes, even 5. While very rare, this has happened a few times on Deluxe. Right here, you can see a few examples of this fascinating phenomenon occurring. And this is how this happened. Because of how much more achievable Max VR is for people, the circumstances aligned in such a way and were just probable enough that 6 people could finish a race with the maximum VR possible in Mario Kart Wii. As far as I'm aware, this has been the only time since Deluxe 7.0's release this has occurred, so far from your everyday thing. I'm just very fortunate I was there when it happened. I really like seeing this system in action. Deluxe's solution has been one of the most commonly proposed ones over the years. I've seen plenty of comments saying, why is it not position-based? Why do I have to lose so much for bad luck? And the creator of the pack just took that idea and made it finally happen. I'd be down to see more custom packs messing around with a different rating system, just to see how it would work out. Anyways, what do you think of Deluxe's VR system? How would you change the one Wii uses, if at all? Let me know in the comments. Me personally, I would just scale it back. Everyone's VR became very top heavy with most people getting over 5,000, and I wouldn't make it possible to lose something like 400 in one race due to bad luck. If you're interested in playing Mario Kart Wii Deluxe, I've included a link to the Discord server where you can download the pack in the description. It's a very fun one with a whopping 656 tracks, my goodness. It even includes Arc Intel's vehicle mod to the game called Rebalanced, which makes every vehicle in the game viable for online. That way, you can use something like the Baby Booster and reasonably win against those try-hard funky Flame Runner users. If you enjoyed what you saw here today, please like and subscribe for more informative Mario Kart Wii content. Thank you so much for watching and have a great day.